The Listeners was written by Walter de la Mare in 1912. This poem is about a traveler who's traveling through a dark lone forest. He reaches a doorstep, he knocks on the door and waits for a response. He waits for somebody to open the door. In fact, throughout the poem, he knocks at the door thrice, each time louder and harder than before, but to no effect. Nobody comes down to meet him and welcome him. The poet has meticulously explained the scenario of the inside of the house and the outside of the house. Outside the house, the traveler is standing still, confused, perplexed, waiting while his horse grazes on the dark forest, grazes the dark forest's ferny floor. Inside the house, the poet talks about phantom listeners. Phantoms are beings who we cannot see, we can only feel them, we can only feel their presence. For example, ghosts. They are the listeners who are listening to each and every movement, each and every sound that is being made outside the house. For example, grazing of the horse, knocking on the door, the call of the traveler. But there's no response, nothing. Towards the end of the poem, the traveler tells the listeners to give them a message. He says, "Tell them, I came, I kept my promise, but no one answered." So here the poem becomes a little melancholic, it becomes a little sad that there was some kind of promise that the traveler was trying to keep, but there's nobody on the other side of the door who would keep his end of the promise. Then we observe that the listeners listen to the traveler climbing on his horse and riding away. Let's talk about the foundation grid of the poem. The setting is it's nighttime, the place is its dark forest and an abandoned haunted house where the traveler appears. The characters are obviously the traveler and the phantom listeners. The tone of the poem is it's serious, it's mysterious, and towards the end it also becomes melancholic. The style of the poem is its narrative, meaning the poet is narrating a kind of an incident, a kind of a story. It's also written in archaic Old English. For example, there were certain words in the poem that were from Old English. For example, neath and spake. The themes of the poem are it's about unknown supernatural beings, it's about mystery, it's about isolation, solitude. The traveler himself was isolated. The house was located in an isolated place. The rhyme scheme of the poem is it's A B C B D E F E, meaning the second and the fourth line rhymes and the sixth and the eighth line rhymes and so on. This rhyme scheme continues throughout the poem. There are many poetic devices that are used in the listeners. For example, onomatopoeia. Onomatopoeia is used, for example, when there's a sound of a specific thing and we give it a name. For instance, the snake produces a sound and we call it hiss. We have given it a name, hiss. The sound of the rain, we have given it a name, drip drop. The sound of the clock, we have given it a name, tick, right? Similarly, there are words like champed and cropped. These are the words that represent the sound of the horses grazing. Then there's alliteration in the poem. Alliteration is the repetition of consonant sounds of the initial letters of words that are coming one after the other, that are occurring in succession. For example, forest's ferny floor. Here, the sound, the the consonant sound of F is being repeated one after the other. Then is his horse. The consonant sound of H is being repeated one after the other. There's personification in the poem. There's a line that says, their stillness answering his cry, meaning the poet has personified silence and stillness that are given the human quality of answering. Then there is symbolism in the poem. Stillness and ghosts, they symbolize supernatural things, they symbolize mystery, right? Then the whole poem is full of imagery. For example, dark turf, this is an example of visual imagery. Leaf fringed sill, this is an example of visual imagery. We are able to